So I wrote this article about 6 months ago titled Mistake Number 1, Running Too Fast on Easy Days. And in it, I analysed the training of elite runners to see how fast they ran their easy runs relative to their 10k race pace. In all the years I've been running, I've noticed a tendency for recreational runners, hobby joggers like me, we tend to run much faster on our easy runs relative to our race paces than elites. And it tends to be the worst offenders, that is, the people who run way too fast. They're the ones that don't ever really seem to make long-term improvements. But those are just my observations. And so what I wanted to do was collect some data as evidence to show that the best runners in the Western world, the people who've been able to rise through the ranks to the very top, they don't do this. So I took a sample of elites, essentially the first 12 men and 12 women that I could find on Strava, who'd uploaded all of their training and featured in the top 10 on a continental list for 2024 in an event from 1500 metres up to the marathon. I then looked at a random 2-week period from each athlete, took out the workouts, warm-ups, cool-downs, long runs, and was just left with the easy running. And I noticed that the average range of these easy runs tended to be between 63 and 70% of their 10k pace. As an example, for a 27:30 10k runner, their easy pace would be between 3:56 and 4:20 a kilometre. To put those in more relatable terms, for a 40-minute 10k runner, their easy pace range would be between 5:42 to 6:20 a kilometre as an equivalent. Now, I don't know if you know many 40-minute 10k runners, but they do not tend to run that slowly. They're probably running, I'd say on average, 40 seconds a k faster than that. 5-minute pace seems to be a bit of a tractor beam. People get pulled into 5-minute Ks. If it's any slower than that, they seem to think there's no aerobic benefit. So this is the part where I caveat by saying I'm not a physiologist, nor the foremost expert on all things running. I'm just a nerdy runner who likes to read up on the science of running so that I can further my own hobby jogging. I'm also not an elite runner, and you'll certainly find examples of athletes who do the exact opposite of what I'm recommending, who are much faster than me. I'm simply a guy who's managed to improve quite a bit by being receptive to new ideas, applying the knowledge I've gained across 15 years of running, and by removing some of the inefficiencies in my training. And with that said, let's move on. So why do elite athletes run so much easier in between hard workouts, and why is this a better training approach? Well, in the article I go into detail about the supercompensation cycle and why adhering to this structure produces a better training effect. That is, a pattern of hard and easy efforts in which we break down but then give our bodies adequate time in which we can build back up. If we follow a pattern of hard and moderate efforts, we don't build back up enough to then progress our fitness level. I'm drastically simplifying here, but hopefully you get the gist. We also have other things to consider, such as our hormonal response to exercise. Hard efforts cause cortisol spikes in our bloodstream, but so too can moderate efforts. And so if we follow a training pattern where we alternate between hard and moderate efforts, we can end up with cortisol constantly floating in our bloodstream. This can prevent our bodies from being receptive to training and can lead to chronic fatigue, consistent illness, and even place us into a catabolic state where our bodies constantly break down muscles rather than building them up. The debate still carries on at the club and recreational level regarding quality versus quantity, but this was settled long ago at the elite level and also in the world of exercise science, as is evidenced by this study on elite runners. It found that the greatest predictor of distance running performance was their total distance run, and the second best predictor was their volume of easy runs. Not, and I stress this point, the speed of those runs. But ultimately, easy running is a way to acquire more running-specific adaptations and to train our working muscles to become better at utilising oxygen without overly fatiguing ourselves. We get the benefits of increased mitochondrial density, capillarization, and improved running economy without significantly adding to our pool of fatigue. But here's the catch. There's a threshold of intensity beyond which we begin to significantly add to that pool. And the problem is, this threshold is at a much lower intensity than most runners seem to estimate. I give a long account of the popular estimations in the article. These include Zone 2 and Daniels' E-Pace, but the conclusion is that these prescriptions are either internally contradictory or far too ambitious. In either case, elites aren't doing this. For the most part, they're running in Zone 1, maybe the very bottom of zone 2 at times if we're being pedantic, and they certainly aren't running Daniels' absurd paces. No one's running 3:19 a kilometre as their easy pace. But let's move on to the elite athlete paces. Well, here's the sample of 24 elites. Many of them are national record holders, and almost all of them are Olympians. As mentioned earlier, the average pace range was between 63 to 70% of 10k race pace. Here's a chart that gives the equivalent paces for athletes at the recreational level. For someone running 30 minutes for 10k, the pace range is 4:17 to 4:46 a kilometre, and so on. The equivalent pace range for me as a 32-minute 10k runner would be 4:34 to 5:05 a kilometre. I tend to run much more slowly than this, but this doesn't seem to have hindered my progression in the slightest, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So what to make of this? And yes, I can hear the ever-present argument that this isn't relevant to recreational runners, because recreational runners shouldn't copy the training of elites. But in this instance, where the elites are being far more conservative than the rec runners, it should at least guide us in our training intensity and present a red flag for those who constantly exceed this conversion and wonder why they're always battling injuries and or never seem to improve. Others will argue that of course elite runners run slower on their easy days, they're doing such big mileage that they have to. Well, firstly, if our intention is to improve as much as possible, and others who've managed to reach the highest level have done so by slowing down their easy runs so that they can run more, then shouldn't we all be following this process? If the argument then follows that rec runners can't run more because they'll get injured, then surely running faster on easy days will only raise that risk. Running slower, but more, has obviously proven in the eyes of elites to not only be the more optimal way of training, but also the more effective way of managing load. And that's before I point out the obvious inverted argument. Rec runners have to do such low mileage because they run everything too fast. Secondly, training load is relative to the individual. Athletes who regularly run 160 to 200 kilometres a week have accumulated a much greater capacity for load than athletes running 70 kilometres a week, for example. Given that the vast amount of the additional mileage carried out by high mileage athletes is done in the form of easy running, then each workout is a much smaller portion of their overall load. A workout is thus a much greater stress, relatively, for a lower mileage athlete, and therefore recovery, running slower on easy days, is all the more necessary. There's also the common argument that rec runners don't have the time to do high mileage because they have work and families, and so running faster is a hack to get more gains with less volume. Working full-time and family commitments will certainly be a barrier to effective training, and many people will find themselves compromising in this position. I don't begrudge these people, however, I'm attempting to address the runners who are capable and willing to make the time for the most effective training. Running, for the most part, is a relatively time-efficient sport, and most people could reach their full potential off a commitment of no more than 15 hours a week. Regardless, I disagree that running faster on easy days will produce better results than running the appropriate intensity for the reasons previously mentioned, most notably supercompensation. In this instance, running faster on easy days is actually less time efficient because it delays the recovery period until the body is ready for another hard workout, where more potent gains are made. I stress again, if an athlete's training program doesn't include adequate recovery to enter the supercompensation phase, they will limit rather than enhance their gains, and their performances will stagnate much sooner or even regress as a result. However, this only applies if one is interested in an effective training system. It's very easy to have a time-efficient training system that isn't effective. In this instance, you don't have to adhere to a supercompensation cycle at all. You simply stick to a routine that's convenient but doesn't produce improvements in performance. And look, maybe everyone isn't as obsessive about their running as me, and maybe they're much better, more rounded people as a result. But I see training as a problem to be solved. And to be more specific, that problem is essentially this. Given that there's only a limited amount of stress my body can handle at one time, how can I best allocate that stress to achieve the best possible training effect? When we realise that every run, every bit of training has a cost in terms of fatigue, as well as a potential benefit in terms of training effect, we can then make decisions that enable us to get the biggest training effect with the lowest cost, or with the right amount of cost. Think of it this way. I'm guessing that most of the people watching this video have probably sat an exam at one point in their lives. Exams tend to have multiple sections, and each section is weighted in terms of the marks you could potentially earn in each one. If you could only earn 5 points in one section, you probably shouldn't spend the same amount of time in that section as you would in one where you could potentially earn 40. That would be an inefficient allocation of time and effort. Training can be viewed through the same lens. The potential benefits of running 20 seconds a kilometre faster in your easy runs is marginal, but the fatigue cost is massively increased. Therefore, that's an incredibly inefficient use of your available training stress. You could be spending those training dollars in a far more effective way to get more volume into your workouts or to do more running overall. And elites seem to have figured this out, and I would say there's a causal effect. To become elite, so many things have to go right. You can't have these massive inefficiencies in your training. Here's a graph that shows my average easy pace over the past 10 years. I took a 2-week sample from the same period in 2-year intervals and found my average easy pace in each period. At first glance, it looks like my easy pace is fairly consistent, but I've slightly increased it in this last year. However, when we factor in that I've moved to a much flatter area in the past year, then this accounts for the faster average pace. A grade adjusted graph looks like this. So you can see that my average easy run pace basically hasn't increased, nor deviated much at all in the past 10 years. For reference, these are 10k performances from around each of these periods. You can see that my 10k time has dramatically come down despite my easy run pace remaining the same. I would argue that I was likely running too fast in 2015, despite 5:20 a kilometre being much slower than what many 40-minute runners do for their easy runs. And this was likely the cause of my troubles during this period. I struggled to string training together because I'd get injured every 3 to 4 months. In 2019, I was in terrible shape after a long battle with plantar fasciitis, and so I made a conscious effort to slow down. There are other variables, of course, but I did enjoy a fairly lengthy injury-free period. I just wasn't very fast. But I'd say the turning point was in 2022 when I started doing a lot of cross-training. This meant that my aerobic system was strengthened to the point where that pace, roughly 5:20 a kilometre, became truly easy. Now what we can take from my experience is that running faster and faster on your easy days is not necessary for long-term improvement. My running progression demonstrates that running faster on easy days hasn't been the thing that's allowed me to run 8 minutes faster for 10k. Then what has been the thing? Well, it's probably a combination of a number of things, but one of them is definitely running more. And the thing about running easy, very easy in my case, is it allows you to run much, much more. I'll finish up by saying that I'm not arguing that everyone should drop what they're doing and start training like this. That goes for all the videos I've made on training. If you're constantly improving and getting great results with a style of training that flies in the face of everything I've recommended, then that's fine. Keep doing what you're doing. But if you're not improving, and I know of many people that fall into this category, then maybe this is something to consider. But for now, remember, you can never take your hobby jogging too seriously.